The Cabal of Tsakata, Episode 3. Mayar 27th, 513. Aside from viewing the ancient murals, today was fairly uneventful. I began sketching and studying the art along the hallways. In order to not be overwhelmed by the enormity of my task, I sectioned off the entire complex and sketched each section one after another. There are 4 murals at the front of the temple worth mentioning. The right and left walls depicted the processions of people eagerly making their way into the temple. All of the models for the people had different facial expressions, body features, clothing designs, and other such things to make them completely unique. I can't imagine how long it took to create these wonderful murals, but I do appreciate the craftsmanship and the care that went into them. Behind the procession were rolling hills of grass, with some hills decorated with random sheep, shepherds, or other pastoral imagery. The floor murals were covered with tiled geometric patterns that didn't serve any real purpose beyond being pleasing to the eye. The ceiling murals were adorned with stars, comets, and other such celestial bodies. The next few days will be filled with a repetition of review and drawing. There are certainly worse ways to spend my days. I'm actually quite pleased. Mayar 30th, 513. While reviewing the procession on the left wall, I came upon a fascinating model. One of the people in the crowd is looking directly at me, rather than have her eyes turned toward the interior parts of the temple. The woman has long black hair, fully exposed, unlike the others around her, wearing headscarves. The woman is holding up her hand, with an index finger raised. When I first saw it, I wondered if she were pointing to something, but the grassy hills behind her are empty, whereas the surrounding hills both have sheep on them. The hill itself is plain and unassuming as well. So far, I have not seen any other model in this same sort of pose. Could this be the artist placing themselves into the mural? And maybe she was counting something, rather than pointing. She might have even been a prominent historical figure back in ancient South-Shiadam. I will have to revisit this mystery later. Janitas 2nd, 513. Obasi, Carol, and Tamal left for Bubesh today for the regular supply run. Dr. Reaver explained that I'll be going the next time. I've sketched more of the hallways, and I'm moving closer to the orgy room down the left hallway. The more I've studied the murals, the more I realize that each of the models have specific details added to them that reveal truths about the particular person. Along the walls, there are bakers, soldiers, wealthy people, and laborers. I've even seen people depicted on the walls that represent Tagunite clerics. It seemed everyone wanted to gain enlightenment and perspective through ritualistic orgies. At night, I've gotten into the practice of making a second copy of the art I sketch. The second art book will be a present for Samira, and a gift or donation to the museum. Maybe the Naquerian patrons of the museum will find insight within the art of the Temple of Tsakata at Ornak. Janitas 4th, 513. I started sketching the first of the ritualistic orgy rooms. Before I got to the actual orgy chamber, there was a small side room where people collected their possessions. According to Dr. Reaver, there was a desk with a large collection of shelves and cubbyholes, and one of the clerics guarded the possessions during the orgies. There wasn't any sort of art on the walls of the possession room, but it still was painted with a pleasant light orange color. As for the orgy room itself, it was very graphic. As I sketched and studied the images, I found myself more than a little hot and bothered. On each wall of the chamber, there are 4 positions or acts being displayed, for a total of 16 different combinations. One wall had a woman providing a man oral pleasure, while another man took her from behind. The second image was of a couple, a man and a woman performing a more traditional embrace. The third image was a man sitting on another man's face. The last was of two women kissing passionately. Along the second wall, the first image showed one man on his knees, orally pleasuring another man, who was kissing another woman. The second image was of a woman who used some sort of artificial phallic attachment, and she pumped it into a man's ass, while the man was orally pleasuring a woman. The third image showed a man using his hand to pleasure himself, spraying his seed onto a woman's face. The last image showed a woman performing oral sex on another woman, while two men held her up. Both men were sucking on her nipples. The woman at the center of it smiled broadly. On the third wall, there were 5 groups rather than the 4. However, the 5th model wasn't like the others. I'll address that last person in a moment. The first of the sexual images along the third wall showed 3 women, and they were all urinating on a man who was on his knees between them. The man had a collar and a leash on, and one of the women held the leash tightly. The other 2 women had whips and other such torture implements in their hands. The man appeared to be enjoying everything being done to him. There were whip marks on his neck and shoulders. The second pairing were 2 men, and one of them took the other from behind. The third grouping had an individual with breasts, but they also had a penis. A man was on his knees and his mouth had engulfed the front half of the woman's cock. The woman, as I am going to refer to her, had feminine facial features, makeup, and a delighted expression. Her hands held the man's head in place. A cleric of Tsakata stood between the third and fourth group engaged in sex. The cleric was fully dressed, and he held his hands out, as if inviting me for a hug, or perhaps waving his hands over the entirety of the orgy. The man's facial features were obscured in the depths of his veil and headscarf. The fourth group engaged in sex were between a man and a woman, and the woman was kissing his neck as the man was hanging from his wrists. The woman had a feather, and she tickled the tip of the man's penis. Against the fourth wall, there were 4 more sexual poses. The first image had a woman who was pleasuring another woman with her hand, while they were cuddled with one another. The second had a man and a woman engaged in traditional intercourse, although they both wore animal-themed masks. The third was of 3 people, a woman and 2 men. The woman was double penetrated by the men, who sandwiched her, although the men were kissing. The last image was a man who was being swarmed by men and women. A man sucked on his penis, while a woman licked his ass. Another woman held the man's hand between her legs, while 2 more women licked at his nipples. Lastly, a man kissed the swarmed man. I described all of this, but it will probably take me several days to completely sketch out. Each of these people depicted here are unique and individual from one another, and the details of each of the acts are so in-depth that I would be embarrassed if anyone else was in the room with me. There are stars on the ceiling of this room as well. Janitas 6th, 513. I have only finished working on the first orgy room. I was incredibly red-faced when Dr. Reaver reviewed my work. Tomorrow I will start on the second orgy room. I noticed as I studied the models on the wall that the same set of 16 poses were used, but with different people doing them. The models displayed in this second orgy room are completely different from anyone else in the entire temple. It should take me several days to sketch all of the murals from this room. One thing caught my attention, or rather, one missing thing caught my attention. The lone cleric isn't in the second room. How strange. Janitas 9th, 513. I finished the art of the second orgy room. There aren't any other significant art pieces for me to draw, so over the next few days I plan to recreate the art I've seen so far in the second art book. That will allow me to analyze the art in the temple. From what I am able to tell, the art shows me that this temple was a highly attended and valued place, both for the ability to gain magical bounties and insight, but also for the sheer fun of indulgence in people's suppressed sexual appetites. People from all over Saoshi-Adam sought out this place of refuge. I could definitely see how alluring such a gathering could be. None of those depicted in the art appeared to be forced to do anything. And even Dr. Reaver explained that Tsakata demanded absolute consent on pain of death. I can't wait to show Samira these sketchings and renderings. I hope it will serve the museum well. Also, Obasi, Carol, and Hamal returned today, and so I'll be the next one to head to Bubesh. Janitus 11th, 513. I discussed my findings with Carol, Obasi, and Dr. Reaver. They all seemed impressed by my artistic skill, and both Carol and Obasi seem more open to my presence now. I was curious about something, so I asked them if the temples were so sought after, how was it that they remained secret from their enemies? Carol explained that the Cabal of Tsakata took extreme efforts to vet the prospective attendees. Sometimes they would take suspicious people to different locations and see how they reacted. Despite the imagery of the walls, special ritual orgies only had maybe 15 to 20 participants separated between the two rooms. She went on to say that special potions, ointments, gels, jellies, and other such things were offered, and most of them were sensual enhancing and or mind-altering. On the regular, people often claimed to have audiences with Tsakata herself. Ritual orgies were only held during full moons as well, according to the texts. Dr. Reaver is still studying the documents, the art, and other such factors and attributes in hopes to find other temples. She strongly believes there are more out there that Shali Shababa didn't find. The sites that the famed hero did find are nothing more than broken ruins, as the temples were destroyed. As it stands, there are no other current leads to other such lost temples. There is still a pile of scrolls to sift through, so we might actually find another lead yet. Janitus 13th, 513. I left Ornak today with a small group of guards. One of the guards is named Isco al-Nasser, and he is Hamal's son. Isco is my age, and he's fairly friendly. For most of the day, we talked about my home country, as Isco had never left Naquer. Hamal had apparently brought him up to be a warrior and a soldier. However, Isco has an immense curiosity regarding what lies in other places of the world. I told him of the town where I had grown up, the country of Ocean Dare as a whole, and what it felt like to be in a brand new place. In turn, I asked Isco about what it was like to grow up in Naquer. Isco was from a small farming village in northwestern Naquer, and his father used to be a farmer. However, when Isco was 3, bandits came and ransacked the whole village. Isco's sister had escaped the village and hid Isco away in a cave. She left him alone in hopes to find their mother, but she never returned. Hamal was away on business with another farming community and returned a day after the attack. Fortunately, Hamal had found Isco, and they left the broken remains of their destroyed home. Hamal had apparently changed after that disaster. He joined the military and raised Isco to be a warrior rather than a farmer. It had been an abrupt change, one that forever changed Isco's life. I asked him about Norris, and Isco's delight fell a bit. From what he could tell, Norris and Obasi were lovers. They were quite secretive about their relationship, and Obasi took it very hard when Hamal brought back what remained of Norris's body. He didn't go into any more details, so I left it at that. I asked him about the Naquerian government and why it was so interested in collecting artifacts from a taboo religion. Isco revealed he knew little about the Naquerian government, only that they were interested in bringing people to the country to see its wonders. The government wanted to improve their tourism trade, and it used the military to secure the sites that would promote and generate foreign coin. Isco is really a kind and approachable person, and I hope that we can become friends. Janitas 15th, 5:13. We arrived in Bubesh fairly late, but luckily there is a room reserved for us at one of the inns. It's too late to try and see Samira, especially because the museum is closed. I'm exhausted from travel, so I'm about to go to sleep. I just wanted to confirm that we made it safely to Bubesh without any trouble. Janitas 16th, 5:13. There was a sandstorm in the area earlier, so it will take a couple more days to fill our provision orders. Isco and the other 2 guards plan to go and enjoy the nightlife and distress tonight. They asked me if I wanted to go along with them, but I told them I had someone I wanted to see instead. Isco gave me some playful jibing and wished me luck on securing another body to warm my bed tonight. I assured him that the person I wanted to see, that being Samira, was just a new friend I had made. Isco didn't believe me, and he openly laughed as he and the other guards went off. He did make me promise that I was going to be safe on my own. So I went to the National Naquerian Museum and asked to see Samira. Unfortunately, she was off today, and not at the museum. I asked for them to let her know I was in town and where I was staying. I returned to my room, and in the meantime I looked through my art book. The artwork of the murals were so detailed, and obviously a lot of work went into telling the stories on the temple walls. As I was reviewing the sketches, I came upon the odd woman who looked outward to me rather than ahead like the others. Even in my renderings of the mural, I managed to capture the haunting insistence of her eyes. What was she trying to say? What was the artist trying to convey? I was so transfixed by the drawing that I jumped when someone knocked on my door. When I opened it, my heart swelled as it was Samira. I invited her in, and we greeted one another with warm smiles. By the goddess, she has such captivating eyes. We sat in the room and we talked for a long time. She asked me how the excavation was, and I told her how interesting Dr. Reaver was, about the other people at the site, and how beautiful the landscape was. In turn, I asked her about how she was, and she glossed over a rather predictable string of tedious events, all reflecting her normal routine. She asked me about the temple, and I told her about all the lovely art on the walls. At first, I slyly described the art I had seen in vague details to enhance her hunger. It worked, and she lamented about not being able to see the art for herself. That's when I pulled out the second art book, the one I had made for her and the museum. Her eyes lit up, and her mouth fell again as she opened it. For the next hour or so, she flipped through the pages, and I followed along with my own copy. While we analyzed the procession murals, she and I discussed the various people depicted on the walls. Samira pointed out how fascinating it was that Tagunite clerics were alluded to a visit at the temple, as Tagun demanded monotheism. Not only that, but clerics of Tagun are demanded to be celibate, which further makes their presence on the walls more intriguing. We also discussed how wealthy nobles and the working poor waited in the same line, for in the eyes of Tsakata, they were all the same when vulnerable and naked, longing for pleasure, acceptance, and connection. When we got to the mural with a woman staring ahead, we both discussed her in length. We weren't sure if she were pointing or counting, and Samira didn't recognize her from any of the other art from that era. She could have been the artist, or the head Tsakata cleric at the time, or a lover of the artist. When we got to the orgy room down the left corridor, I couldn't help but turn a bright shade of crimson. Samira laughed, but she said she certainly understood my bashfulness. She got comfortable and laid on her stomach while she flipped through the pages. I sat in a chair at the work desk, and I will admit I kept my version in my lap. Samira admired my attention to detail and asked for confirmation that the murals were this elaborate. When I said they were, she laughed over how I must have stared at each of the images to get it just right. She must have reviewed each of the walls for at least 5 minutes. We decided to go to a restaurant and continue to look at the art books. I felt so self-conscious and weird discussing the graphic art in public, but we dined at a secluded table in the back. She and I began speculating over the cleric briefly, and she explained that several armed clerics were always watching over the ritualistic orgies to make sure consent was always maintained. Despite what Tigunite clerics might want others to believe, Tsakata was fiercely against rape, and she killed those who didn't respect consent. That was another reason why the clerics of Tigun were so against Tsakata. Ancient Saushi Adam was a patriarchal society, and Tigun believed that women should be subservient to men. Oftentimes, men and husbands could take their wives whenever they wanted according to the law. Samira clarified that modern Tigunite sects moved away from that thinking, but many traditionalists still clung to that mindset. I asked Samira if she worshipped Tigun, and she does not. We looked at the other sketches in the orgy room, and I pointed out that the same poses were used in both rooms, but with different models. Samira noticed that the cleric of Tsakata was not shown on the walls of the second orgy room. We returned to my room and continued our discussion. The cleric in the orgy room had his arms opened wide, as if blessing the events going on in the room, or perhaps welcoming them. Unlike the other people presented on the walls, the cleric wasn't quite detailed. We revisited the odd woman again as well. She stood facing the hallway, rather than staring ahead in anticipation. She held up an index finger, either indicating a number or count, or pointing above her. However, nothing was above her on the wall. And then Samira asked a question I had not thought of. She asked me where the ceiling tiles above the woman were. My heart twisted a little, as a great deal of excitement flared up inside me. I showed her where the corresponding ceiling tiles were, and we gazed at it together. On the ceiling tile above the woman, there was a star significantly larger than the others around it. In comparison, it was about 50% larger than the other ones. Most of the other stars were tiny, with the exception of 2 stars that trailed away from the bigger one. She and I looked at the next ceiling panel, and more similar stars lined the hallway before veering down the left hallway. Another giant star was on the ceiling panel, right above the cleric's body. The tension in the room was oppressive as we stared at one another. What potential secret did that cleric protect? Samira and I stayed up all night discussing it. She made me promise to tell her what was found within. I can't wait to go back and discover it for myself.